Every few weeks, another cruise ship arrives at the same stretch of coastline. Some of them once cost hundreds of millions of dollars to build. Some carried passengers just months earlier. Within a year, almost nothing recognizable is left of them. The place is called Aliaga, on Turkey's Aegean coast, about 45 kilometers north of Izmir. It's not glamorous, an industrial strip of cranes, steel yards, and refineries, but along a roughly 10-kilometer stretch of shoreline, spread across more than 100 breaking plots, this quiet town has become one of the busiest places on Earth for destroying ships that will never sail again. Here's what you're about to find out: how a ship this size actually gets destroyed, where the real money in a dead cruise ship comes from, why some of the most famous ships in cruising history ended up here decades early, and why the ship you might be sailing on next year is already, in a very real sense, on a clock. Let's get into it. How a cruise ship actually dies. Here's the part most people get wrong. There's no crane lifting the ship out of the water. No dry dock easing it into place. They crash it onto the beach on purpose, at full speed. By the time this happens, the ship has usually already been stripped of anything genuinely valuable at its last working port. What's left is a mostly empty hull riding high in the water. A pilot lines up the bow with the shore, waits for the right tide, and drives it straight onto the sand at speed, letting the ship's own weight carry it as far up the beach as physics allows. Once it settles, it isn't moving again. That final run onto the sand is the last time its engines will ever turn. It's called beaching, and it's the cheapest way on Earth to bring a ship ashore. No expensive machinery, just tide and momentum doing the work for free. It's also why this entire industry has clustered in only a handful of places worldwide. You need a beach with the right slope, deep water close to shore, and a workforce that already knows exactly how to do this. But getting the ship onto the sand is the easy part. What happens next is where the real money is. Why almost nothing goes to waste. A scrapped cruise ship isn't trash. It's closer to a floating warehouse, and that's the entire reason this industry exists. The biggest prize is steel. A large cruise ship can hold tens of thousands of tons of it, and unlike ore that has to be mined and smelted from scratch, this steel has already been through that entire process. It just needs cutting, sorting, and shipping to a mill. For a country with a booming construction sector, that's a shortcut worth serious money, which is a big reason Turkey, hungry for steel for housing and infrastructure, became a natural hub for this work. Steel is just the headline, though. Ships get gutted deck by deck before the torches even reach the hull. Furniture, kitchen equipment, artwork, brass fittings, even entire glass elevator cabs get pulled out and resold, often to hotels and restaurants wanting something distinctive. There's also a genuinely passionate resale market among former cruisers and collectors, who will pay real money for a cabin door or a porthole turned into a mirror, just because of where it came from. Somewhere out there right now, a restaurant or a beach house is decorated with a piece of a ship someone once took their honeymoon on. Nobody in the room has any idea. Getting to that stage, though, takes people, a lot of them, doing something most workers in this industry actually dread. The job scrapyards hate seeing arrive. Ask the workers at Aliaga which ships they least want to see beached, and cruise ships top the list. That's counterintuitive. They're not the biggest vessels afloat. But size isn't the problem. Layout is. A cargo ship or oil tanker is mostly one big hollow space, so crews can start cutting almost immediately. A cruise ship is the opposite. Hundreds of individual cabins, restaurants, theaters, casinos, and engine spaces, every one of them packed with wiring, plumbing, and furniture that has to come out by hand before a single torch gets used. To put that wiring in perspective, one of the largest cruise ships ever built, Icon of the Seas, reportedly carries over 3,000 miles of electrical cable on its own, enough to stretch coast to coast across the United States. Multiply that kind of complexity across hundreds of rooms, And it's easy to see why a full cruise ship can take close to half a year or longer to dismantle, done by a workforce of around 2,500 people, cutting and hauling largely by hand. It's also genuinely dangerous work, in tight, poorly ventilated spaces, and reporting on shipbreaking has long flagged serious safety concerns across this industry. And it's not just the labor that's hazardous. What's hidden inside the walls of these ships is its own problem entirely. What's buried in the walls? Cruise ships built decades ago weren't designed with recycling in mind. Cut into the wrong wall, and you might find asbestos insulation, heavy metals in old paint, or other hazardous residue that's supposed to be contained, not released. Aliaga's environmental record hasn't always been clean, and pollution concerns along this coastline have been documented as recently as the last couple of years. But the pressure has pushed standards up. Several yards now hold European Union ship recycling certification, and a global treaty called the Hong Kong Convention finally took effect in 2025, requiring ships to document every hazardous material on board before a yard can even accept them. Whether enforcement actually matches the paperwork is still an open question. What's not in question is that this isn't the only graveyard on Earth, and where Aliaga fits into the bigger picture explains a lot about who ends up sending their ships here. Where Aliaga fits in. Aliaga isn't even the biggest shipbreaking operation in the world. Alang in India and Chittagong in Bangladesh both process far more total tonnage. What makes Aliaga different is who it attracts. Increasingly, it's become the destination of choice for Western-owned, higher-profile ships, cruise liners especially, partly because of proximity to Europe and partly because certified yards give cruise lines something to point to if anyone asks questions. And in 2020, a lot of people started asking questions because ships that had no business being scrapped yet suddenly started showing up in droves. Why ships this young get scrapped at all? Here's what should really surprise you. Many of the ships beached at Aliaga aren't old. Often they're 25 to 30 years old, young for a well-maintained ship, and were still turning a profit right up until they weren't. Normally, an aging cruise ship gets passed down the ladder, premium brand, then budget brand, then charter operator, squeezing out a few more profitable years before anyone mentions scrapping. Then, 2020 happened. When the pandemic halted cruising almost overnight, every idle ship became a pure liability, still costing money to crew, insure, and maintain, with zero revenue coming in. Multiple operators lost billions in a single quarter. Faced with that math, several companies chose to retire their oldest ships outright. Trade reporting noted a roughly 30% jump in business at Aliaga as a direct result. One of those ships mattered more than most. Royal Caribbean's Sovereign of the Seas, launched in 1988, was the largest purpose-built cruise ship in the world at the time, and she's widely credited as the first ship to introduce the multi-story atrium with glass elevators, a design you'll still find echoed on nearly every large cruise ship built since. In 2020, under her later name, Sovereign, she was beached at Aliaga and cut apart like everything else. Which raises an obvious question. If she belonged to one of the biggest, most recognizable brands in cruising, why did she end up on a beach in Turkey instead of somewhere with cameras and accountability? Why the paperwork looks strange. Part of it is simple cost. A dry dock is expensive to run at this scale, while beaching costs almost nothing. But part of it is legal maneuvering. In much of the developed world, exporting hazardous waste is heavily restricted, and an old ship full of asbestos can legally count as exactly that. So, a shadow industry exists around it. Cash buyers who purchase retiring ships, re-register them under flags of convenience from countries with minimal oversight, and resell them into the scrapping market, quietly severing the legal link between a famous brand and wherever its ship actually ends up dying. To be fair, more cruise lines have started sending ships to certified yards openly in recent years, partly because of exactly this kind of scrutiny. But the underlying incentive to find the cheapest, least watched beach hasn't gone away. And here's the part that should really stick with you. This isn't a one-time story. 2020 wasn't a one-off. Cruise lines are pouring tens of billions of dollars into new ships over the next decade, and analysts are already predicting another wave of non-core retirements within the next few years. As older, less efficient ships get pushed out to make room. Not every retired ship gets scrapped immediately. Some get sold on, some get preserved as static hotels, but scrapping remains the most common ending once nobody wants to keep a ship sailing. Remember that ship we watched crash onto the beach at full throttle? Somewhere right now. A brand new one, just like it is, sailing out of port for the first time, 5,000 passengers on deck, no idea that the same beach is already waiting for it, decades down the line. Ships don't get scrapped because they're worn out. They get scrapped the moment they stop making more money than they cost to run a calculation that will keep repeating as long as this industry keeps building bigger ships to replace the old ones. So next time you're standing on the deck of a ship that feels brand new, remember, somewhere down the line, there's a beach like this one waiting for it too. What surprised you most, the economics, the recycling, or the scale of it? Drop it in the comments, and check out the next video on this channel if you want to go deeper into how the cruise industry really works behind the scenes.